Susan Lacy will work collaboratively with artists and communities beginning in the 1970s. Now, the thing about Susan Lacy that you need to understand is her work crosses boundaries between conceptual and feminist and activist art. She also kind of crosses the line into performance art. So this is where, again, things tend to get muddy as we move closer and closer to the modern day. It is more and more difficult to really put people in a clear classification. And this is not because it's necessarily closer and therefore we have less historical hindsight, but rather because things become increasingly individual as we move into a postmodern world where the individual experience is the same as the societal experience or has the same importance. And so everyone's voice becomes more and more individual, and therefore it becomes harder and harder to categorize. So let's look at her work. In this case, we're looking at 3 weeks in May. Now, this was a 3-week long extended art piece. This is basically performance art. So there's multiple pieces to it. It's really an event that goes on. There are pictures and some recordings of elements, but unless you were there, you don't get the entire grasp of it. That being said, let's try and dig into some of what she was trying to do. Now, what Lacy was trying to do is she wanted to bring attention to how frequently women were assaulted, sexually or otherwise, on the streets of Los Angeles. The piece consisted of performances, public drawings, and installations. In this image, Lacy is marking the site where 2 women were raped by proclaiming it in large red letters on the sidewalk, and then drawing an outline of the body similar to a chalk outline of a murder victim used by the police. Why do this? Because it draws public attention to something that otherwise you might not see. You could walk down the same street every day and not realize the things that happened the 23 hours and 59 minutes that you're not walking down that street. And so she's calling people's attention to it. She's making it clear that these things are happening. And she's doing it by using red, which is a color of danger, passion, associated with sort of negative connotations in this case, anger. She's using the body form as if there's a murder that has taken place because a part of these women has died in this rape or assault, whatever the circumstance may be. Now, speaking about the piece later, and by the way, here's another part of the piece where they're mapping these rapes that are happening over a 3-week period. And you can imagine how disturbing this map will become. But speaking about 3 weeks in May, Lacy stated it was used as an organizing device to bring people from different anti-violence organizations and different political perspectives together on the same program, and as a way to create public dialogue on rape and women's solutions to it. And this is something that we try not to think about as a society. We don't typically think about sexual assault and rape. We think about murder a lot, maybe bank robbery. Think about the things you see on the news. You don't see a lot of someone was sexually assaulted at this corner. You see a lot of so-and-so was killed or such and such general went off and did something. So she's trying to call attention to something that we don't typically pay attention to. And these things do come up in more modern day. In the last few years, we've seen, for example, the Me Too movement, which has drawn similar ideas out into the open once again. And arguably, we will continue to see movements doing so until we find some way to either solve the problem or seemingly put sufficient attention on it that it eventually ceases to become a problem. Now, the piece engages with many facets of feminist art through its message of social awareness, expression of women's social and personal perspectives, and the use of performance and installation as opposed to traditional media. such as sculpture or painting. Why do that? Because sculpture and painting is typically going to be hidden behind the hallowed walls of art galleries and museums, places that a lot of people don't go. But if you move that into the open, now you can have a public dialogue. Now you call people's attention to this specific issue, and that's what makes this so powerful. For a 3-week period, she is focusing on this one small area, and as you look at those maps, as you look at what's going on, you realize how ubiquitous this experience is, how frequently it's happening. And it should be terrifying enough that you go home and think about ways that maybe you can prevent it or do something about it. Maybe you change the way that you think about women. Maybe as a woman, you change the way that you think about the safety of your city. There's a lot of different possibilities here. But she's drawing out those thoughts, typical of conceptual art, doing so using performance art rather than the more traditional paintings and sculptures that we've seen to this point.